Welcome to the Unreal Podcast with your host, Darren Lindley. In the Unreal Podcast, we tell true and amazing stories that will change your life. Over the last 15 years, we've surveyed more than 100,000 people and written more than 240 books filled with remarkable, hope-inspiring stories. Listen each week as we bring you another incredible story. The Unreal Podcast is brought to you by booksbehindbars.net, a ministry dedicated to bringing the gospel to prisoners across America. Welcome to episode number 9 of the Unreal Podcast. Today's story is an incredible occurrence that has taken up too much of today's news. We must warn you, there is an incredibly violent scene that takes place at the very beginning of the story. If this would cause you emotional or psychological harm, we strongly encourage you to move on to the next podcast, which may be more suited for you. In today's story, you'll hear about a man living on the very razor's edge of life and death. Will he make it? What will happen when he finally meets the perpetrator of this incredible crime? Bla-Boosh was written by our remarkable writer, Samantha Evans. You will see her here crafting a marvelous story. It was read by my friend, Phil Beecher. And now to our story.
Bla-Boosh, the story of Henry, written by Samantha Evans. I heard a click, immediately followed by a low, short burst of sound intermingled with shattering glass. A gunshot? The sound didn't register until after the pain did. My left arm stung, so I turned my head to find out why. Crimson stained my short-sleeved polo, the upholstery of the car, and jagged fragments of what remained of my driver's side window. I expelled a shuddered breath at the gape of missing muscle and tissue from my upper left arm. Oh my goodness, I've been shot! My universe contracted until only my arm and pain existed. I just saw, heard nothing else. I need to get help. When I tried to push the door open, it hit something. Combat boots and dark pants registered as a soft impact knocked me back into the driver's seat. I never saw the color of his shirt or any other details about him, the shooter. Only black combat boots and dark fatigue pants. He stood by my car, pumping his shotgun to prep another shot. In another low, loud burst of sound, I felt the right side of my face explode. The shooter ran off before I got out of the car again. Not that I would have noticed. Glass fell from my body like shimmering red confetti. I managed 2 steps and tripped on the raised curb at the sidewalk. Who will take care of my family? Thought shot through my mind, rapid fire. Someone help me. Seconds later, the stranger reached me. Come over here, she said. Let's sit down. On the second try, she got me to sit. Is there anything the paramedics need to know? She asked. My words slurred from the facial wound. The impact of the shot blew the right side of my face away, and my teeth disintegrated into powder. Yes, blood thinner, I managed. Somehow, she understood me. Initially, I missed the flash of fear that crossed her expression as she connected the blood thinner would have on my extensive wounds. My blood puddled and seeped into the cement beneath me. She coaxed me into lying down. She wrapped something soft around my head, just under my nose, as tightly as possible. Her gentle hands applied firm pressure. When paramedics arrived, they applied a neck brace and shifted me onto a stretcher. I'm told that I gave a thumbs up as the EMTs loaded me into the ambulance. I have no recollection of doing so. Paramedics asked me about my pain levels, but I registered no pain through the haze. Adrenaline wore off and I relaxed, trusting that they would take care of me. After that, my world went dark. At the restaurant, my family waited. "Where's your daddy?" my wife Linda asked. Emily shrugged in response to the rhetorical question. Sirens grew louder as an ambulance whizzed by the restaurant. My daughter Emily's phone rang. Caller ID showed her husband's father calling. "Emily, how's your dad?" Normally a composed, eloquent man, her father-in-law stuttered through an incoherent string of words that Emily couldn't make sense of, but her jaw slackened with the foreboding tone of the call. Her phone chimed, alerting her to an incoming call from her husband. Emily grumbled softly in frustration and chose to stay on the line with her father-in-law. "Emily, what's wrong?" my wife's expression asked her. Emily flitted her hand quietly as a gentle hush. "I'll be right back," she told her mom. She hopped up from the booth, pushed through the restaurant's door, and waded into the hot sun, squinting against the bright light. "All right, I can hear you better now. Calm down. What's going on?" "Emily, there's been a shooting. They're showing it on the news. What does that have to do with my daddy?" I recognized his car. Her heart dropped into the pit of her stomach, and she realized that what her father-in-law told her was true. She looked up then, registering the congested traffic surrounding the restaurant. As the traffic light visible from where she stood, a state trooper redirected the traffic. Police car and fire truck sirens echoed off the buildings of the busy downtown. The ambulance came to mind then, too. "Okay, we're on our way to the hospital," she said into the phone. She dashed back inside. "I'll contact the others to meet you there." They hung up. "Mama, we've got to go." Linda's eyebrows shot upward. "Why?" "There's been a little accident," she told Linda. My sweet daughter, excellent with details, called the server over and made sure to pay the bill before they left the restaurant. The four of them piled into the sedan, however. The busy street resembled a parking lot as police officers blocked off various intersections, preventing motorists from clogging the crime scene. Panic and frustration built as Emily inched forward and depressed the brakes, moved forward 2 or 3 more feet, and hit the brakes. She corked her brewing emotions for the sake of her mom and sons. Despite the incident occurring in a city with tens of thousands of people, when Emily finally made it to the front of the roadblock at the traffic light, she and the officer stationed there recognized one another. She rolled down her window and pointed toward where the shooting happened. He bent down, leaned in. His uniform filled her view, but a family friend filled the uniform. "I want to get to my dad." Her statement triggered details. Realization showed on his face. Like I said, my car was recognizable to those who knew me. "Emily," the officer replied, "I can neither confirm nor deny that your dad was the man shot." "Shot!" my wife shrieked, hearing the words for the first time. His eyes held sympathy for my wife and daughter. "But I can tell you that you need to get to the hospital right now." I patted the car at the open window and motioned the other officers to let them pass. No vehicles except the one that carried my family received clearance to pass through the roadblock. "It's okay, Grandma," one of our young grandsons said from the back seat. "Nan Daddy's going to be okay." At this statement, my wife and daughter burst into tears. News traveled fast. My wife's and daughter's phones rang off the hook during those first hours. A friend of my oldest daughter called her first. Annoyed that he had called her on her cell phone while she was at work, she answered with exasperation in her tone. "What do you want?" "Dottie, a man with a gun just shot someone in a parking lot." "Oh my goodness," she replied, still not quite understanding why he told her this. "There was a shooting," Dottie told a nearby coworker. "Dottie," her friend continued, "it's your dad's car, I think. I think he shot your dad." Chills coursed through her body. Not again, she wanted to scream. Not now. Dottie had battled cancer for more than a year. Only that week, she'd completed her 44th radiation treatment. This can't be happening. Beside Dottie, her co-worker pulled up the news on her computer. They gaped at the screen. Pictures showed the back of a man's head as paramedics strapped into the stretcher. She instantly recognized me and my car, which filled the background of the photos. Daddy, no, she cried. I've got to go. Dottie, will you be okay to drive? I'll be fine. I've got to go. Dottie frantically tossed things into her purse. Her phone rang once more. Emily, I know what's going on, and I'll meet you at the hospital, Dottie said. She hung up and sprinted to her car. No, no, no! Nightmares converged. Images of the past haunted her as she pulled into traffic. Someone tried to kill her daddy. Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God! Because Dottie worked on the side of town opposite the accident, she navigated through traffic without a problem and reached the hospital about the same time as the rest of my family. Congestion within the hospital resembled the chaotic crime scene nearby. No one in the ER spoke idly or walked at a lazy pace. Stethoscopes bounced on the shoulders of doctors and nurses as they sprinted down corridors and darted in and out of hospital rooms, often colliding with other hospital staff, visitors or officers equally pressed for time and answers. The doors to the hospital never quite settled from the ebb and flow of people rushing in and out. They admitted the man who had shot me at the same hospital, treating our gunshot wounds simultaneously down the hall from one another. Police had shot the man when they had caught up with him several blocks away. Authorities and hospital staff took extra security precautions. They put the hospital on lockdown, and patient care coordinators ushered my family into a private room beyond the public waiting area of the ER. At one point, the surgeon made an appearance telling my family about the necessary blood transfusions. He projected his stark report without any sugarcoating. Emily looked at him and asked, "Is my daddy going to live?" He looked her in the eye and shook his head minutely. "I don't know." Other family members and people from our church trickled in, awaiting the verdict. Extra doctors were called in, and one of the men who arrived was an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat specialist. His nurse, a friend of Dottie's, knew our family intimately. She spoke with him as he approached the hospital and conveyed her love for our family. Then she prayed for the doctor over the phone. When the ENT emerged from the operating room to speak with my family, he spoke, dumbfounded, about the sense of peace that filled the operating room. "What are his chances of survival?" Emily asked, not for the first time. The question took the doctor aback. "I'm not sure," he hesitated, as if uncertain about how honest he should be. "I'm actually surprised he's made it this far." He stared into the knowing expressions of my family, possibly wondering what they knew that he did not. Emily vocalized what everyone thought. "It's God," she told him. The others in the room smiled wider with her positive admission. Despite my family's optimism, it unsettled them not to have a statistic for my recovery, a tangible number they could hope against. In order to cope with their apprehension, they passed a journal around to one another, recording events as they unfolded. The surgery consisted of removing birdshot and teeth fragments and administering a preliminary cleaning of my wounds. A more in-depth cleaning would take place 2 days later. I coded twice on the operating table and suffered 2 strokes, but I survived. My sons-in-law arrived soon thereafter, as well as several other family members, and the hospital staff could not have kept members from our church out even if they had the time or energy to try. People of all ages covered every surface of the waiting room until it nearly burst at the seams. People in chairs, under chairs, on armrests and laps. People standing, sitting, and sprawled out on the floor. Many prayed, some vocally encouraged, others asked questions. Some brought food to the hospital, some remained silent, but each of them showed support. Hospital staff brought meals up from the kitchen, going to extra lengths to provide comfort. The mayor and the chief of police arrived to express their sympathy. Phone calls of support and concern continued. Many of my family's callers reported seeing a double rainbow, although it had not rained, and interpreted it as a sign of promise. Following the 3-hour surgery, I stabilized. Doctors placed me in a medically induced coma to allow my body time to rest. They hooked me up to life support and inserted a tracheotomy tube. My body swelled from the injuries and the IV fluids. Doctors wrapped my face in gauze as well as my left arm. A wound VAC, vacuum-assisted closure, attached to my arm aided the healing process. With a number of machines doctors had me hooked up to, I looked more like a science fiction experiment than a man. 8 hours after the shooting, they granted my family permission to enter my ICU room. Normally, we're only supposed to allow one visitor in at a time, one nurse whispered to Linda. But nothing about today is normal, is it? She forced a smile. You don't expect him to live, do you? Linda concluded. Let's hope for the best, she replied. Minutes later, she escorted Linda, Dottie, Emily, and Emily's husband to my room. You will still need to be brief, the nurse said kindly from the doorway as they entered. Emily shivered at the low temperature. Linda gasped at the sight of me. My babies cried. They remained in the room for several minutes, murmuring to me and whispering to one another. When they walked back to the waiting room, Linda bravely faced those waiting. Her voice sounded deep and scratchy as she encouraged family and friends to visit with me. I don't know if he'll pull through, she said, waving back platitudes and unsubstantiated promises of my recovery. We don't know for sure, she repeated. So if you want to go see him, now is the time. Several people hopped up right away. Several declined. I'm sorry, Linda. I just don't want to remember him that way that you've described. Linda nodded her understanding. Hospital staff allowed others to enter 2 at a time. Their visits took on the feel of a funereal visitation, intermingled with tearful prayers of hope. Later, Dottie approached my side and touched my hand. Hey, Daddy, she quietly sobbed. Thank you, God, that he's okay. Well, you know what I mean. Help him to survive this. Help him not to end up like Granddaddy.
When you hear this man's daughter praying for her father, it's pretty intense. Don't worry, we'll get right back to the story. But first, we want to talk to you about the mission that we are on. Just today, I received another request for books from a prison chaplain in Alaska who's been listening to this podcast. We have a huge need and a massive opportunity to bring the gospel to inmates. The exact stories you're hearing are the very stories we're sending into prison in book form. If this story is touching your heart, can you imagine what it would do for an inmate? Every book gives the inmate an opportunity to receive Jesus and contains a sinner's prayer. Would you please help us get these books into prison? We need your help. If you could sponsor 1 book a month for $10 per month, or 3 books a month for $30, or even 5 books a month for $41 per month, you would be part of changing the lives of these incarcerated people. We have a very generous donor who really believes in the Unreal podcast and the ministry of Books Behind Bars. And he has pledged to help us get off to a powerful start by doubling every donation of 5 books a month or more for the life of that donation. This is really an incredible lever that will maximize your gift for as long as you desire to be involved. Would you get involved today? Go to booksbehindbars.net and click the donate button. Just do what you can.
On weekends, Linda's father had worked overnights as a watchman. Every Sunday morning, Linda's brother had greeted their father at the warehouse he guarded and had brought him breakfast. And every Sunday he had known he'd find the warehouse door wide open and his father propped up in a chair beside the door. But one Sunday morning, when my brother-in-law had arrived, the warehouse door had remained closed and the chair empty. Surprised and a bit frantic to lay eyes on his father, my brother-in-law had broken into the warehouse through a side entrance. My father-in-law had been beaten and robbed and then shot in the head. Even if Linda's brother had found him right away, nothing could have saved him. The tragedy had shattered all of us, but it had hit Dottie the hardest. She knew the man accused of the shooting. He'd attended high school with Dottie. They'd grown up together. After I got shot, she relived that nightmare. "Daddy, please don't die." Dottie's hand hovered above the bandages wrapped tightly around my face. "Oh God, no. Daddy, please." She sat with me, inescapable thoughts and memories consuming her while tears rolled off her cheeks. "They are treating him in this hospital too," Dottie told me. "The police spared his life. She couldn't believe that someone had murdered her granddad and then someone had tried to murder her daddy as well." Bitterness swelled. "Why, God? Why is this happening to my family? We were supposed to be celebrating today. Why would somebody try to murder my daddy?" She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. A machine beside the bed beeped at predictable intervals, monitoring life. Another contraption pressurized, pushed air into my lungs and pulled it out. Medical staff provided these machines to keep me alive, but Dottie put her trust elsewhere. "God, please. Oh, God, please." Day 1. A close friend spent last night with Henry. She couldn't stay in the room with him, so she stayed in the waiting room. The girls and I went home to try and rest, back at hospital by 8:30 a.m. to relieve her. Linda. Doctors monitored my vitals throughout the day following the shooting. Believing me stable enough for another procedure, they informed my family they would be attempting a 2-hour surgery the next day to clean out the wounds more thoroughly. Nurses gave my wife a pager to keep her updated with the surgery's progress. She received a text that read, "Surgery has started," and later, "Surgery is going well." But when the 2-hour surgery turned into 3 hours, and 3 hours became 4, my family feared the worst. Finally, the plastic surgeon joined them in the waiting room. "How extensive is the damage?" Emily asked. "Well," the surgeon said, looking legitimately puzzled. "Somehow, the pellets fired at point-blank range managed to miss every vital portion of his face. They missed his carotid artery, which with your father's blood thinners would have been a death sentence. They missed his ears, nose, and eyes. Even his tongue, which is irreplaceable, remained intact. In addition, I expected to find dead and rotting tissue in his face," the surgeon told them. "With the extent of his injuries, it should have been unusable tissue. I expected to cut it out to prevent infection and gangrene." "But," Linda asked, "but I like what I see. I see enough good tissue that between the healthy tissue and the team that I have with me today in the operating room, I think I can reconstruct his face right now." My girls cried tears of joy at the news. The doctor looked at them strangely. "You don't seem surprised." "It's what we've been praying for," they told him. My wife remained rock steady throughout the ordeal, answering questions, dispensing hope, squeezing hands, allowing others to grieve. When a friend asked her how she managed, she said, "I knew I had to be strong for Henry's brothers, for my daughter, and their husbands and children. I just put on my big girl panties and kept going." "I know," said her friend, laughing through her tears. "But when did you let your guard down and grieve yourself?" "I wept with Henry's brothers at the hospital, and when I go home alone each night, I'd go into the bedroom and talk with the Lord the way I wanted to." Emily hated the shooter, furious that he had tried to steal her boy's grandfather. She determined not to forgive him. But her heart changed when she stepped into the meditation room at the hospital. Emily sat on a padded bench in the quiet room. Light poured through a single rectangular window, and her eyes gravitated to a small cross. Away from the chaos and stress and the expectations of friends and family, she released her emotions more freely. She wept and told God how she felt about the shooter. Her stubborn, bitter tone spoke more truthfully than her words themselves. In that moment, she later told me, peace beyond understanding shot through Emily's heart. With her heart stilled, she felt the truth impressed upon her. "You need to forgive the man who shot your dad." Her heart jerked back from the notion. "No way," she said. "There's no way." As she argued against her own heart, she recognized what the bitterness would do to her. That man's wrongdoings did not belong to her, and bitterness would fasten his actions to her heart. Forgiveness freed her heart as much as his. "God, I can't do that. I can't," she cried. "And what if Daddy doesn't survive? I can't." "You need to forgive the man who shot your dad." She shook her head no, even as a Bible verse, part of the Lord's Prayer, came to mind. "Forgive others as you have been forgiven." Emily expelled a shaky breath. God, I forgive the man who shot my dad." After saying the words out loud, she hoped that the feelings would follow. When she left the meditation room, her heart felt lighter, if only a little. Day 7. A couple from church came by tonight and sang to Henry. They sang hymns. Linda. I opened my eyes 10 days after the shooting, disoriented and confused. Linda and Emily jumped to their feet and gathered close beside the bed. Memories flooded in. "Boosh!" I told them. "Boosh!" My voice sounded gruff and unrecognizable. I gently touched my face and explored the port at my throat where the doctors had inserted the trach tube. "Boosh! Bla-Boosh!" "Dad, I can't understand," Emily said, looking at me as if I had 3 heads. "Boosh!" She frowned and then reached for a notepad resting on the bedside table. She scribbled something and turned the notebook toward me a moment later. I stared at the alphabet blankly for a moment and then raised my right forefinger to the letter B, then L, A, C, K. Slowly I spelled out the words black boots. "Boom, boom," I said. "You're safe now. Everyone is safe." "The police arrested him, Henry," Linda assured me, reaching for my hand. "They shot him, and then they arrested me." I raised my finger again. I, L, O, V, E, Y, O, U, S, H, U, G, G, I, E. Emily wiped her face with a tissue. "We love you too, Daddy. We love you too." A couple of minutes later, I fell asleep again. Day 19. Daddy said he saw black boots. He said he got himself out of the car, heard a boom. Dottie. Nurses eased me off the stronger pain medications, and for the next 4 days I slept more than not. I experienced strange dreams. When I woke up, words that made complete sense in my head made absolutely no sense to my family. I looked at my girls expectantly, but they only wrinkled their foreheads in confusion as worry warred with laughter. Daddy, what's PTO? PTO, I repeated into their blank gazes. I didn't care what we talked about. It relieved me to talk with them at all. I sighed and said something different, or tried to. Dottie, Emily, and my Linda all stared at me. Then they glanced at each other. Their grins widened slowly, and then they exploded into laughter. Emily had to wipe tears from her eyes when the laughter finally subsided. Daddy, did you just say something about the Easter Bunny? I nodded yes, and they laughed all over again. Emily quickly procured a dry erase board and presented it to me. I quickly scribbled in terrible handwriting. I had a dream about the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. I shook my head with good-humored frustration while they doubled over with laughter. Several nurses poked their heads in upon hearing all the commotion. Over the next few days, my family filled in the missing pieces of what had happened after the shooting. Visits wore me out, but it felt so good to see my son-in-law, brothers, church members, and other friends and family. I was most grateful to see my grandsons. They filled my dreams in those days more than anyone or anything else. In addition to dreaming about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, I dreamed, quite coherently, about Jesus. In that dream, I spoke with Jesus about my grandsons. To this day, I wonder whether or not it was merely a dream. It's been years since the shooting, and my family still gives me a hard time about those first days and the things that I said. I spent 25 days in a hospital bed before they transferred me into a rehabilitation clinic. Day 23. Daddy cried with me today, realizing how lucky he is. He said his EMT said he was probably going to die. He said he didn't know why someone would do this to him. I cried with him. Emily. The EMTs expected me to die. The doctors and surgeons didn't expect me to survive the surgeries and medical procedures. The physical therapist anticipated months of therapy regain my strength. On the first day of physical therapy, when they wheeled me into the exercise room, I can walk, I insisted. I can walk. Skepticism shone on the physical therapist's face, but he shrugged and walked across the room to retrieve a walker. I took 3 steps on the track with the walker before declaring, I can't walk with this. I stood up straight. Do you have anything less inhibiting? The physical therapist raised his eyebrows in surprise. All right. He left and returned with a 3-pronged cane. I walked more than halfway around the track with the cane before setting that aside as well. So my physical therapist found a single-legged cane. We walked a loop and came upon the wheelchair. You need to rest? He asked me. No, it feels really good to be out of bed. I kept going, missing his eyebrows, which shot upward. Midway through the second lap, I lifted up the cane and handed it to an able-bodied man walking beside me. Here, I don't need this. I finished the last half of the lap with nothing but my own 2 feet. When we approached the wheelchair a second time, I eyed it with anticipation. Simply walking caused me to perspire. I felt discouraged and exhausted. I slumped down in the chair and asked, Mind if I sit and rest? No, Henry, do you realize what you've just done? He gazed at me, bewildered. You've just fit weeks of physical therapy into less than an hour. All right, so that caused me to smile. Even if I was tired enough to nap, after walking less than a quarter of a mile, I continued to exceed their expectations with wide margins. When they asked me to walk the steps one time, I climbed them 3. And 15 days of physical therapy later, 40 days after the day of the shooting, when doctors didn't expect me to live through the ambulance ride, they waved goodbye to me and sent me home. My family exuberantly recounted to me, our friends, and church members reports and picture text of the double rainbow the day of the accident. We couldn't help but wonder, in the biblical story of Noah, a rainbow is mentioned as a sign of God's promise after 40 days of rain. We, too, took that rainbow as a symbol, and it revitalized faith deep within each of us, that despite our stormy trial, God walked with us. We paused and gazed at one another, flooded with relief at my recovery and awestruck by the many ways in which we'd seen evidence of God. Day 40. Discharged from the hospital about 1 o'clock, Henry enjoyed the ride home. Once we arrived and saw all the people welcoming him home, he cried, "Linda." The stranger who helped me the day of the shooting called me at home. Only her name is Nikki, and Nikki is no longer a stranger. She lived several states away and had come into town for a wedding. That night, on the phone, Nikki told me she felt like she was meant to be right where she was when I needed her. "Henry, I believe I traveled here from out of state in order to be with you." Months later, the heels of my wife and Emily clicked down the sidewalk as we approached the front doors of the courthouse. We met up with Dottie outside and walked together. The sun shone, just like the day of the shooting. "You okay, Daddy?" "No, I'm not. I'm fine." My chest filled with heaviness as we drew closer. That day, my family and I would face the shooter for the first time. We passed a few onlookers outside, but said nothing to them or one another as we fortified ourselves for what would happen next. Once inside, I gritted my fake teeth against the cynical thoughts at the sight of metal detectors. The officer present requested that my wife step aside, and he ran the invasive wand over my body. My face flushed with the irony of it all. Beside me, my daughters shifted uncomfortably. The courtroom filled quickly. The shooter's mother and brother sat among us. Anxious about the events of the day, people present spoke to one another in loud whispers. A couple of friends who had arrived ahead of time waved us over. By the time the court proceedings began, nearly a dozen people clustered with us, showing their solidarity. Among them sat extended family, close friends, and church family, as well as our pastor at Greenville First Pentecostal. Then the man who shot me entered the courtroom, and the room fell into silence. He wore a dress shirt and tie and handcuffs. One attorney told us ahead of time that we would have a chance to address the shooter and say what we needed to say. When it was our turn, I let the girls go first. Emily wrote out a speech ahead of time. Linda did, too, and Emily read it for her. Dottie's speech, recalling the person who killed her grandfather, read, "Here I stand again in the same courtroom." Her voice wavered. "I love you." I whispered as my family spoke hundreds of snapshot details. Some memories, some facts told to me flashed through my mind in the space of seconds. The shooting, my months of recovery, bills, Nikki saving my life. In a city of tens of thousands, friends of my daughter recognized me and cared for them. The double rainbow. church family singing hymns at my bedside. Peace in the operating room, surviving 2 flatlines and 2 strokes, ears, eyes, arteries, and tongue intact, living tissue where the doctor expected to find none, recovering months ahead of schedule, believed with my whole heart that God held my family and me in those days. Even moments after the shooting, I had faith that God was with me. When Nikki knelt beside me, just before she wrapped my head, I touched the cross at her throat. Jesus, amen, she agreed, which means let it be so. Lord, please. While my family waited in the restaurant, Linda did what she always does when she sees or hears an ambulance or witnesses a car accident. Boys, we need to pray for this ambulance. My grandsons had set down their crayons and rested, folded hands on the table. My wife bowed her head and prayed for the medical workers and the wisdom of the doctors. And she prayed for the injured person. God be with this person. Help him or her to recover quickly. And give this person's family strength during this time. May they find their Lord. May they find their peace and comfort in you. Amen. Amen, my family echoed. Lord, please, in the family, in the car as they raced to the hospital, one of my grandsons said, Grandma, angels told me that they have Nan Daddy in the palms of their hands. Lord, please. I am certain that these miraculous answers to the prayers are God's fingerprints. To me, they are proof of His loving presence at my bedside in the hospital. Hands outstretched. Hands cuffed, authorities caught the man who hurt me. They nailed him with evidence. The judge required that retribution be paid by the guilty man before me. That's when it hit me. I, too, have made mistakes that hurt people. Justice required that retribution be paid by the guilty man within me. Only God's beloved Son removed the shackles from my wrist and accepted the wounds to His own palms instead. Authorities caught Christ. They nailed Him. So when the judge asked me if I had anything to say to the man who shot me, this is what I said. Your Honor, I expect him to receive the maximum penalty according to the law. Then I looked the shooter in the eye and opened my titanium jaw to speak. I forgive you. When the court proceedings were finished, Linda approached the mother of the shooter and offered her a hug. All I can say is I'm sorry, the woman told Linda. Me too, Linda replied. Since then, more than one person has commented, I just don't see how you can forgive him. My reply is always the same. I don't see how I can't. It happened while I lay comatose. It might or might not have been a dream. I slept in my hospital bed, but I stirred and awoke. A man stood right beside my bed. He wore a white robe and held out his palms toward me, offering me help. His outstretched arms gestured, Can I hold you? The words didn't feel like a question, but a promise. Due to his proximity, seeing his face would have required me to look up, but I didn't. Fixated on his hands, I had already concluded who stood beside me, offering me help and hope. He disappeared suddenly. I want to see my grandboys grown, I cried. Lord, please. Then I woke up.
It's an incredible thing to know that Jesus is with us no matter what we face. His grace really is sufficient. Let's be praying that as prisoners read this story, maybe even prisoners who've committed similar crimes, they will see the impact of their actions and the fact that there is a God who can change their life. Don't forget to go to booksbehindbars.net today and become a part of changing this nation with the gospel.